We've all seen ads for interactive fiction games like Choices, Episode, Chapters, The Arcana, what have you. I was a Pixelberry and Choices fan for many years, but as we got into the late 2010s and the books from Choices started to lean more into the steamy CEO romance and having babies genres, my interest waned, and I noticed other Tumblr users talking about this new app called Storyscape, so I thought, hey, why not? And I went off to the App Store to go and install it. Then, for a blissful few months, I enjoyed one of the most well-crafted and ambitious episode-style mobile apps that I'd ever encountered, captivated by the branching narrative, the characters, the artwork and animation that were quite a significant step up from what I was used to with Choices. I was having a really good time. And then the game shut down, and it's been close to 5 years now since that closure, which feels all at once like no time at all and so long at the same time. Either way, to me, the wound is still fresh and the gap still unfilled, so today, if you will, let me tell you all about the short-lived game that its fans called the best of its genre, tragically cut down in its prime. Storyscape, created in the now rather controversial Unity 3D engine, was a mobile game made by Fogbank Entertainment and released by foxnext, which was a virtual reality and theme park unit of 20th Century Fox. Art directed by Ken Capelli with a huge team of artists behind it. After a beta phase in 2019, the game was made available worldwide in late October of that year, and I personally installed it shortly after at the start of November. It's clear from the texts that I was sending to my partner that I was having a good time with it. Obviously the game is now defunct, so I'll be relying on screen recordings to show you the remains of the game, along with social media and blog posts. I also found a portion of the Storyscape style guide, so stick around because there's some cool stuff. There was a lot of general visual similarity when it came to Storyscape versus other games of the genre. Being on a phone held vertically, everything within the visuals is in portrait mode. There's the left and right screen direction whenever there's dialogue, but Storyscape had much more beefed out visuals than something like Choices. Rarely at any point were you looking at a still image, and a lot of scene backgrounds would be layered. If it was just a still image, the camera would move a lot more, creating something more cinematic. Shows set the scene with highly polished establishing shots, drawing in focus with cinematic interludes in motion, and reserving the rougher, low-detail backgrounds to fill the space for dialogue-heavy scenes. The stories in Storyscape were referred to by the development team as shows, each having seasons, and referring to chapters as episodes, much like if it was telly, and on each episode a writer, a director, and a producer is credited. The character models for each character were referred to as actors, with a detailed guide showing how much refinement should be given to each actor, and heavy focus being on the face, with detail becoming rougher the further down the body you go. Character expressions could be quite complex, rather than the oft-used still character sprite with its 5 or 6 different moods to swap between that we get in a lot of visual novel apps. Character faces were much more animated, with some limited mouth movements and speaking, and moving through the expressions rather than just popping from neutral to shocked to happy. It was almost like the animation episode with the art style of Choices mashed together and then enhanced. Much like other games of a similar vein, as the story moves along you would be presented with choices that would affect the storyline, or the way that a character might feel about you. Normally it'd be about being helpful or obstinate, though sometimes it helps to have been paying attention to what you've been reading and apply knowledge your character is supposed to have been taking in. Diamond choices were premium choices that would give an extra boost to you at the cost of some real-world currency. In more action or adventure shows, the premium choices may be to obtain a weapon or a clue to help during a tense moment, or to help unravel a mystery. In more romantic-themed shows, you'd often be presented with a new outfit for your character that would make a better impression on love interests right off the bat, or simply be given extra scenes with love interests in exchange for some of that sweet, sweet moolah. The love interests, often shortened to LIs by fans of the interactive fiction genre, are of course kind of the main draw when it comes to games like this. You know, you see a bit of Prince Liam from Choice's royal romance, you think, oh I'll have some of him, and you get into it. Love interests in Storyscape come, as you'd expect, in a variety of ages, personalities, ethnicities, and backstories, being the most fleshed out characters within the game. In Storyscape, I'd say they're all pretty nuanced and of course pretty conventionally attractive. They want you to want them, after all. And of course, hopefully so too will you want the romantic scenes that would feature these love interests. I will admit, I do enjoy them. I do, typically, in this sort of game. You'll pick one love interest, or not, hey, you might want to go for them all if the game allows you. Choose the flirty options, and then you're likely to be presented with a premium diamond choice. You'll pay a bit of real-world actual currency, and then get to see something of an R-rated scene, you know, a healthy heaping of sauce. What is notable and quite specific, I think, about Storyscape is that due to the less customizable characters, which we will see more of, the saucy scene special images would actually feature a player character and love interest getting down to business on screen, rather than, say, the pin-up style, look at this picture of your love interest special images you usually get from Choices. I'm sorry to always be comparing it to Choices, but Choices is like the leading app in this genre right now, so it's like the best one to compare to. The Storyscape style guide actually had an entire section in it about these saucy scenes, referred to here as sexy times, which lays out some of the rules about just how scenes should be depicted, with a lot of careful hand and clothing placement along with dramatic mood lighting to shadow all the naughty bits. The style guide states that this sort of content should follow basic cable and app store rules and aims to be suggestive rather than explicit. I just really like this quote that says, "We must give lady boner with these," and it also does suggest that they did know that their audience probably was primarily the ladies. Problem that Choices had at the height of its popularity is the ratio of male to female love interests, often skewing in favour of male love interests, and often white male love interests at that. I remember seeing a lot of sentiment from Choices fans during this sort of time when they were all turning to Storyscape with the hope that Storyscape would kind of break this mould, so I will be keeping track of the male to female love interest ratio in each of the Storyscape shows, and then we'll compare it to the male and female love interest ratio in Choices at the time that Storyscape was still playable, and see if any of that data has any value whatsoever. During its life, Storyscape had 5 shows available, with a 6th publicly announced to be in the works that we were shown previews of via the Storyscape blog, but the full show unfortunately never saw the light of day. Each show had a distinct genre and tone, and some you will see had tie-ins to existing IPs. Since the game is now shut down, I will be including some spoilers for each of the stories, so if you were interested in watching some of the many archived playthroughs available on YouTube, please be warned of these spoilers before I get into it. If you're happy to continue along with me, then let's dive into the shows. Please pretend that my heart necklace is blue. Titanic was a romantic drama written by Meghna Jayanth, Lara Avery, Drew Karpyshyn and Megan Thornton, and was based on James Cameron's 1997 film Titanic. Yes, the one with Leo and Kate, and while Leo and Kate's characters Jack and Rose are aboard this Titanic and do in fact make cameos within the Storyscape show, this was an original story, and our protagonist and point of view character is a young woman, Adele, born Adel Karem in Lebanon, though she starts off the story in a women's prison in London. It's the era of suffragism, and Adele is a fierce young suffragette who's very much into women's rights. It's interesting that they don't shy away from the period-typical police brutality, so we definitely get that high drama vibe straight away from this show. We follow her on the famous voyage from London to New York with her teenage sister Helene. Adele gets into trouble with a slimy rich guy, James, and in order to avoid staying in prison, she ends up newly employed as a secretary for James's aunt, a rich fancy lady who Adele is tasked with breaking up the engagement of at James's behest. Aboard the Titanic, Adele encounters various characters, 3 of which are her potential love interests, but there are other non-allies to meet, including a deathly pale Rose DeWitt Bucata, with whom Adele can share a couple of brief scenes. There's James to keep dealing with, and there's Adele's cabin mate Lena, who is a fashion model and the designated wardrobe character of the show. She keeps bringing Adele her really quite historically accurate clothes to wear in exchange for the in-game diamonds. I love Lena. Lena is an icon. In Titanic, the love interests for Adele are Matteo Vasari, James's loyal valet, a serious, intelligent type who seems honestly kind of mean and cynical to me, but who can soften up if you give him the chance. Personally, I did not, but for those who like that kind of enemies to lovers type storyline, I imagine he's the natural choice. Zeta Serda, Adele's employer and James's aunt, a movie star engaged to a director in an effort to stay relevant. She's a straight-up fox and definitely a popular love interest on Tumblr at the time. The lesbians loved her. When I read her lines, I can just hear the transatlantic accent she'd probably have. Charlie Stoke, a steward on the ship with a lot of knowledge and interest in the mechanics and workings of the ships. The kind, brave type, Charlie is a romantic who is saving himself for true love. The whites of his eyes are just a little bit too white, and I find them really distracting, but when I played Titanic the first time around, I think he was the one I went for, just based on personality, since he was the nicest, and because he was supposed to be from Yorkshire, Northerners forever. The male-to-female love interest ratio for Titanic is 2-1. While Rose is off having her own James Cameron movie adventure, we stick with Adele, who's having a different, presumably much more fraught experience aboard the so-called Ship of Dreams. I don't know for sure what kind of time Rose is having, as I haven't ever actually watched the film. Adele is set to task with her job of interfering with James's Aunt Zetta's engagement, but she faces problems with her sister and the growing emotional distance between the two of them the more time Adele spends with her new acquaintances, and the more time that Helene spends bonding with another Lebanese family who help her connect with her heritage. Then of course there's the tragic sinking of the ship. Depending on the choices made, each of Adele's love interests can either be saved or perish when the ship goes down, though ideally not before getting some serious smooch time in with one or more of them. There was also a really interesting choice with this, where saving one of the love interests actually makes them kind of hate you for it in the end. Definitely high drama. This felt to me, at the time the game was functional, to be the most popular of the available books, at least with other Tumblr users. A period romance is almost always a hit, and being based on a well-known movie definitely helped. It wasn't my personal favourite, but I did enjoy it a lot, and I really liked how it showed little bits and bobs of the workings of the Titanic, how different things were between the classes. I always prefer to follow more of a personally relatable protagonist than like a super rich one, and the show seemed to be well researched and true to its time period, at least as far as I, a non-historian, can tell. Titanic historians chime in if I'm wrong. Titanic was intended to be an anthology show, with future seasons planned to follow the stories of new characters, and that in each season, players would play as a new point of view character with a new story and meet new, different characters, rather than get a second go at Matteo, Zeta, or Charlie. Of course, since Storyscape shut down, this second season never came to fruition. As far as I can remember, work had already begun on this second season when Storyscape was shut down, as I followed one of the producers on Tumblr at the time, and they had been answering questions about the second season in a vague sort of way, but they essentially only said it was worked on and possibly not finished, but always intended to feature new characters and wouldn't be revisiting Adele's story. I expect our Season 2 protagonist might have had more of a chance to share brief scenes with Leo as Jack, the way that Adele gets to meet Rose. On a semi-related note, Choices released their own Titanic book that I gave a try to a while back to see how it compared while I had Storyscape's Titanic fresh in my mind, and it really emphasised the difference between the two, with Ship of Dreams starting off extremely horny. It was actually kind of embarrassing to read. I had to close it pretty quickly. You're barely 2 minutes in when the big buff crew person walks in on your character getting changed and she starts flushing and fluttering about them. It's just not believable. There was no build-up at all and it made me cringe really hard. But the biggest slap in the face for Storyscape fans was when they introduced you to your character's older sister, and her name is Adele. Come on. They knew. They had to have known. Cruel. Post-Storyscape, writer Meghna Jayanth has continued to work writing for the gaming industry, notably on games such as Boyfriend Dungeon and Sable. Laura Avery has written young adult novels such as The Memory Book and A Million Miles Away. Drew Karpyshyn is already a well-established senior writer for BioWare. His most recent novel is The Time Kings of Las Vegas. Megan Thornton is a well-established writer with Telltale and recently worked on Insomniac Games' Spider-Man 2. Life 2.0 was a romantic comedy show about starting over, written by Laura Jackman, and followed the main character starting her new life as an intern in a big new tech company. This show featured a slightly customizable player character. You could choose your name either by inputting one yourself or using the randomized option, but not your gender. The player character was always a woman. And you could choose her ethnicity, shown here in the style guide, to specifically be white, black, East Asian, Latina, and South Asian, but you couldn't choose her hairstyle. That's not to say her appearance is stagnant, as much like with Adele in Titanic, you get plenty of opportunities to change outfits, and most of the time these outfit changes come with a different hairstyle. So while the outfits are the same no matter which ethnicity you pick for your character, her hairstyle was what was variable. So I didn't log them all, but just to show an example, like with the episode 7 look, I've got pictures here showing a different do for each version of the main character, but with the episode 3 look, we've got evidence that both the South Asian and the white character have the same hairstyle, hairstyle, and I'd hazard a guess that based on the hair length, the East Asian character might also have had the same side-swept hairstyle, but unfortunately I couldn't find any screenshots. Nobody was screen recording Miss East Asian main character, she's lost media. In the style guide, the artists designing the clothes were looking to make outfits that were contemporary, fashion-forward, and mainstream, but I leave it to more fashion-minded people to decide if the Life 2.0 outfits really nail that or not. Your character begins the story having just moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, where I believe the Storyscape team was actually based in real life, from Chicago, and she's about to start an internship with NG Organize, and here she meets several characters, but most importantly, she meets the love interests. Michelle, your housemate who works for a fashion house and provides all the outfits you can wear for diamond choices, and she's the obvious choice. My god, she was stunning, she was flirty, she was funny, and she was perfect. Abigail, your work colleague and sort of rival, but you can turn her around and put the smooch on her if you're nice to her instead of rising to the bait. Jaime, your colleague who's struggling with a sense of cultural identity in the world of the tech bros. And Eitan, you only had one shot with him, but since you can have an encounter with him, and I expect they plan to do more with him in further seasons as evidenced by the Season 2 banner art, I will count him. Cute Dave, so called because he's one of two Daves at the player character's office, is a character I completely forgot about, but is also a romantic option. He looks like Chris Pratt, although I think public opinion on Pratt was already pretty negative by the time this game came out, so I don't know how popular he actually was. This means that the male to female love interest ratio for Life 2.0 is 3:2. The plot is fairly straightforward. Our character takes on intern life in her 30s, noting the age difference between herself and her colleagues and roommates. Most of the story is about getting to know the love interests. The whole thing is thoroughly a romantic relationship-based show, I guess, like How I Met Your Mother or other sort of network TV shows like that. I don't know. I can't deny this one was great for the saucy scenes, but this isn't a genre that I'm particularly interested in. Certainly not if it was just like a TV show rather than an interactive story, but I enjoyed the more light-hearted tone of this one, maybe just on the basis of getting a break from the high drama of shows like Titanic or Eternal City. It reminded me of the Choices series Love Hacks, another young people find their way in the big city comedy, though as the season progressed it did dip into more serious topics, and I imagine it would have taken those further if it had had the chance. Post-Storyscape, Laura Jackman has worked on Netflix shows including Grace and Jackie and the live-action One Piece adaptation. Eternal City, my absolute favourite of the Storyscape shows, was a dark fantasy show written by Storyscape writing director and Star Wars novels author Alexander Freed. It followed the story of your character and her friends trying to build a life after escaping from slavery, learning about how to survive outside of their garden prison as they grow up in the so-called Eternal City. The story would have followed your character from childhood until adulthood, though in the end, of course, only one season was produced, so we didn't quite get that far. This was another show with a customizable player character. Again, you could choose your character's ethnicity but not hairstyle, and again you could only be female. The ethnicity options were East Asian, Black, possibly Indigenous American, and then 2 white options. Your character would begin as a very young child, moving into preteen to teenhood, and then it was shown how our character would grow into adulthood, though the story itself never made it to the point where you could play as her. According to this concept artwork by artist Kate Balfe, your character was aged roughly 8, 14, and then 21. You could also pick your character's name, but you were given a prompt at the beginning that stated, "Characters in the world of Eternal City are often named for objects, ideas, and colours." Again, you could input it yourself, or choose a randomised option. I remember that the default randomised option I got when I played was Moonfish, and it's a name that's stuck with me since. I actually named my most recent D&D character after her. This was one where you could really affect how your character acts via the choices that you make, choosing to be either compassionate or cruel, which of course would affect how well you were able to get to know other characters. I personally could never bring myself to make any of the mean choices in games, so I was always trying to be as nice as I could, and it did really feel like those choices mattered in this show. Eternal City was not a romance-focused show, but relationships with characters obviously still mattered, the main ones being your character's relationships with her fellow garden mates. These were Violet, who is pessimistic and rude, often lashing out at the other children, but softens up when she's shown kindness. Cinder, who seems to be the oldest and has the most knowledge of life outside the garden, the calm and level-headed one of the group. Paige, who is shy and sweet, often bullied by Violet, but the whole group is protective of him overall, Violet included. And Mudboy, who is mute and difficult for the other children to understand. And though he's later given the opportunity to learn sign language, we still don't really get to know him on a deep level due to the show's cancellation. The story begins with the children making their escape, with your character helped out by something called the Entity, a being in the forest always heralded by the scent of honeysuckle and fermentation, who appears at first to be the skin of a human face over a writhing mass of purple beetles which move in and out of the mouth and nose holes as the character speaks, is genuinely quite unpleasant to behold, though a diamond choice offers you the chance to guide its appearance to a more pleasing shape, which could either be the same human face but given a bit more humanness to it, as well as a hunky nude male body and some hair, or you could choose the appearance of a little girl in a nice galaxy dress. I didn't have the money to spend at the time that I played, so I had to just stick with the gross bug skin suit. There's a lot of highly detailed bug and insect imagery in Eternal City in general, so imagine that if you were bug phobic, this one would be a real ordeal. Once out into the garden and into the city, your character and her friends would set about trying to build a life, and as the player you are presented with the choice to either have the children become beggars or thieves, and depending on which area in the city you decided to hit and with what kind of angle, there were apparently 36 different names that could be given to your group. Now that's some serious branching narrative planning, and I love it. I imagine the flowcharts there. As the story progressed, your character would encounter more characters, eventually joining up with an underground group known as the Cagers, and led by the Night Mother, who runs the underground city prison and takes in the children, all of them if you so choose, though you can choose otherwise for a certain member of the group, and one of your group chooses to leave no matter what you choose. Another character that you would meet who was one of the Cagers was Haunt, who acts as a mentor to your character, and who is tough, kind of mean but hunky in that way that many of my fellow Storyscape players found attractive. I remember seeing several Tumblr posts from the time hoping he'd eventually become a love interest, though I personally thought he was too old for the main character who, through her time with the Cagers, starts to find her way amongst them, all while learning abilities marked by sigils pertaining to the entity that helped her in the beginning. The first season of the show ended with the hook that the Night Mother was going to take the garden back for the people and bring down the caretakers that hoard the resources, inciting a war between the Cagers and the caretakers in order to seize the garden for the people of the city. I wish like hell we'd have been able to see it. Eternal City didn't get to the point of really having romance options, as your character is a child for most of the story, though you did get an opportunity to kiss Cinder if you wanted. The male to female love interest ratio in Eternal City is 1-0. No, actually, Eternal City, it's my favourite one, and they had sort of the most to find artwork-wise when I was just sort of trying to do research, since the artists' names were available to find. A look at artist Kate Balfe's website shows a few pieces of concept art that I suspect were also from Eternal City. There's a page of drawings that are explicitly of Cinder, so for the fans of the game lamenting that we'll never get to see our characters' garden mates grow up, we do at least have an idea of how Cinder would have looked as an adult. And on Paul Rainwan's Instagram page, he posted a lot of really lovely character concept art for Eternal City, including some of Bezor, the children's keeper at the garden, and again we have some design work for Cinder, here I think probably at his youngest child appearance and then his teenage appearance. He could have had a scarf. It's interesting to note that one of the Storyscape blog posts shows Endless City had been altered a bit during its beta testing phase in response to player feedback, with reworked choices and other changes made to improve clarity of narrative, necessitating all beta players to have to restart from the beginning. Of all the Storyscape shows I'm agonized about, this is the one I'm the most agonized about. I was so incredibly captivated by the fantasy world, the gorgeous visuals, and hooked by the story of the protagonist. I'm genuinely still so upset that we'll never get a chance to find out what was meant to happen next, or visit and relive that specific world. It felt so alive and detailed and interesting to me. Just, oh. I've got a tweet here from writer Alexander Freed, who said, "One of my favourite moments from Eternal City Season 2 was the option to kill someone for the first time. It was deeply uncomfortable to write. It would have been, I think, uncomfortable to play." So I suppose that's just one tiny crumb of what we'd have gotten to see in Eternal City Season 2. Listen, if you're going to look further into any of the Storyscape playthroughs watchable here on YouTube, or maybe delve into the fandom wiki pages, make the one you go for first Eternal City, because I've been quite brief here with regards to the story itself, but I can't overstate how cool I think it is. Freed, who has had a long career in sci-fi and fantasy fiction, has also most recently worked on Violent Dawn, a dark fantasy graphic novel since the closure of Storyscape. The X-Files, probably my second favourite of the Storyscape shows, was a sci-fi mystery show written by the Marvel comic book writer Sean Keeley McKeever and based on the famous X-Files TV series. This was, like Titanic, an original story starring two new characters, Jess Dexler, a former US Marine and FBI agent, and Aaron Fulton, another FBI agent with a tragic past. The Storyscape official Tumblr gave Dexler's age as 23 and Fulton's as 25. I was in between their ages when I played through myself and older than that now, and scream, they're babies, what are they doing out there? Though Fox Mulder and Dana Scully, the protagonists of the X-Files TV show, are not main characters, they do still feature in mentorship roles, and some premium choices can unlock these extra scenes with them. The show opens with Dexler in the first episode as she's stationed at a military base in Alaska, immediately encountering a mucus man that eats her comrade, after which she is introduced by her colleague John Doggett to Special Agents Mulder and Scully, all three of whom are characters from the X-Files TV series. Dexler teams up with them, and the quartet dispatch the monster, which starts Dexler's life on a new path with the FBI, her encounter in Alaska spurring her to seek a career in the X-Files. We meet her new partner, Aaron Fulton, at the end of the episode and are properly introduced in episode 2, though we don't get into his point of view until later, and we spend time getting to know him through Dexler's point of view as they begin working on their first case. You, as the player, can decide how Dexler receives Fulton, choosing how she feels about him and how they'll work together from the get-go. Much like the television series, there's something of a Monster of the Week procedural element, and in each episode there are hints towards a larger mystery arc that takes place over the season, though there are really only 3 main stories that take place across the season, with each being a multi-episode affair. Trial by Ice is the first case, Martin Sneeberg Jr., a killer working under orders to protect his ailing mother, as well as his secret about his ability to flash freeze people. This introduces us to the dynamic between Dexler and Fulton, as well as insight into their backstories. While we've already learned about the incident with the mucus man that set Dexler on her path to the X-Files, in this case, we learn about the murder of Fulton's family at the hands of his football coach, and how the tragedy affected him and the way that he gets into people's heads, or rather, allows them into his own as a way of understanding their motives. Dexler and Fulton bring their flash-freezing killer in at the end, starting to establish themselves within the FBI. Pierced, something of an interlude, is an episode in which we spend time with Fulton, who meets his therapist and we get to know a bit more about how he works. Overall, I would say that they do give a fair split to development between both leads, but I personally do find Fulton's character to be a bit juicier, what with that tragic backstory. Fulton meets up with Greg Pierce, his boss, and the man who rescued him from his family's killer, and Dexler meets up with her friend Caitlin, as well as her own boss, and then all the bosses meet up with each other and all act mysterious. Dexler is also contacted by Hey Guys, a masked hacker and founder of the Magic Bullets, who were puppeteering Martin Sneeberg Jr. of the first case. Hey Guys claims that he's seen the error of his ways and wants to help Dexler to prevent the Magic Bullets from murdering anyone else. In this interlude chapter, there's a lot of spending time with each protagonist away from the other, allowing you as a player to choose how they see each other, as friends or co-workers, as stepping stones. It's possible to have their relationship as anything from acquaintances to friendly to enemies, though I personally just always wanted them to get along. Hashtags. Dexler and Fulton investigate multiple deaths at a university. In this one, something of an evil Facebook causes the students to die. Fulton is paired up with Gregory Pierce, which he struggles with. They investigate the campus itself, and Fulton nostalgically imagines what university life would have been like if he'd gone himself. During the investigation, a 5th student death occurs. Dexler goes to meet the app developers and gets paired up with John Doggett, who she clearly has a huge crush on. She struggles in the sexist environment, but the investigation leads her to Danny Bright, the culprit behind it, and the mysterious ritual he's performed to cause the deaths. Flame War. The final story arc of the show concerning Cecil Lively, another character from the first season of the X-Files TV series, played by that dude I've seen in GIFs from so many Supernatural fans thirsting over him on Tumblr. Good choice, I think, though I wonder how many of his fans knew his likeness was in this game, because if they knew, then Storyscape probably could have had a real boost in playership. In this one, Fulton and Dexler work most closely with Mulder and Scully, since Lively was a previous case of theirs. There's a hostage situation that I think can be either one of our two agents, but it's up to Fulton to choose who it is that is the hostage. From there, it's up to whoever isn't captured to rescue the other. It's a fun bit of choice making. You can really help or hurt their relationship depending on who you choose. Final case closed. We spend a little bit more time with Fulton and Dexler, and they have their first and only off-the-job hangout. There's hints to an overarching conspiracy, various people having a hold of various X-files that they oughtn't to, and Dexler has one last video call from Hey Guys, promising to get the dirt on one of the three higher-up boss-type characters of her choice, and then that's where things end. The identities of Hey Guys and the magic bullets never gets resolved. The X-Files was renewed for a season 2, but as we know, that's not something we ever got to see. As this, again, was not a romance-focused show, the romantic interactions are few and far between, and diamond choices are more to do with getting opportunities to find extra clues. However, there were still a few romantic opportunities for each protagonist. For Dexler, she and Fulton have an opportunity to kiss, despite the fact that Fulton does have a girlfriend, naughty naughty, and Dexler has the option to hook up with John Doggett. For Fulton, as we already know, he and Dexler have an opportunity to kiss, naughty naughty, and he also has Stacy, his established girlfriend. Dexler and Fulton, I have to say they do have chemistry to me. I can't remember if I indulged in the naughtiness and had them kiss or not when I did my own playthrough, but I think if Fulton didn't already have a girlfriend, I'd be like, yeah, let's have these two hot people kiss each other sloppy style. So, when I played the X-Files for myself on my phone back when Storyscape was available, I only ever played for free. And playing for free versus playing with diamonds, man, when you have diamonds, so many more clues are revealed. You get a lot more opportunities to play as characters other than Dexler and Fulton, with premium choices as AD Skinner allowing you to see more of how the operation sort of running the X-Files is going, and you get to see the friction between Skinner and Pierce, Fulton's boss. Another chapter gives you a chance to play as Agent Scully, with the quest full of references to the Cancer Man, nodding to presumably another antagonist from the TV series. This was actually the first X-Files thing I've ever been hooked by. I've given the TV series a shot multiple times, but it's never really grabbed me the way this did. I was so interested in the way they'd set up the protagonists, their backstories, their dynamic, and apparently I was so gripped by the story that I was even having nightmares about the scary bad guys, as seen in this text that I sent to my partner about it. Anyway, I know it could never happen, but they seem to make X-Files revivals all the time. They're constantly rolling David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson back out. I know that Dexter and Fulton's faces were made up, but there's probably some generic Hollywood hot people out there who fit the bill and who could play them. Please, I miss them. I need a proper spin-off with these characters. I need to know what was supposed to happen next. Post-Storyscape, writer Sean Keighley McKeever has returned to comic book writing for Marvel Comics. Edge of Extinction was a sci-fi survival show written by Mass Effect and NY Times best-selling author Drew Karpyshyn. It was the first limited series, therefore not intended to have sequels. Set in a frozen post-apocalyptic Norway, in which the rest of the population has been finished off by a deadly toxin, you could play as either a man or a woman hailing from America who came for a ski vacation and then the world ended. The story picks up 3 months after this extinction event. The aim of this one, as you might expect, is to survive. Along the way, you, the player, would have encountered various companions from different countries and walks of life, many of which have different languages to you, and therefore, just by way of not being communicated with, are quite minor in the grand scheme of things. Much like TV shows of the same genre, characters you meet could just as quickly be killed off as soon as they appear. Much like video games of the genre, you could sometimes choose between them to decide who does survive and stay on to be in your group, like the determinant characters in games like Telltale's The Walking Dead. This show is good because you get a doggy, and boy were they ever proud of the doggy, as this very detailed blog post about her creation indicates. You really get to see the doggies glow up here. Your character meets her after she rescues you from a bear. She leads you to her former home where you find the body of her owner and also find out that the dog is named Scaddy. You could rename her if you so choose or just call her Scaddy. She is perfect and excellent, and what a joy it is that you get to take her with you on your journey. And good too, because she saves your character's life multiple times. Probably a good thing that there is a dog, because ordinarily a show of this genre, certainly a TV show of this genre, wouldn't entice me at all, but I tend to love interactive fiction no matter what the genre, and I found myself enjoying this one though in the end. As with the rest of the shows, Edge of Extinction's writing was great, very suspenseful, and the characters believable, and the artwork absolutely stunning. Also, the player character is stunning, not gonna lie. Both the male and female version are such hotties. Each character in your group has a bar for how much they like you, your dog included. The different levels go from disliked to neutral to trusted to liked and then best friend level, though typically characters you meet would start at the neutral step and could either go up or down, much like with Dexler and Fulton in X-Files. There are some significant choices that really alter the story in this one such premium choice being to give your character the backstory of either a cop or a doctor, which affects your abilities within the story, but there are certain characters that if you spare them or allow them to die, it can really affect the group dynamic from that point. You may kill one character, which blocks off their ability to help you later, you may save another at the expense of one of your current companions dying. There's a significant choice where you can attempt to save one character at the expense of another. You cannot have both, and either way, one of your allies is deeply troubled by it, regardless of which character dies. This show was one of those that had quite a dramatic reveal about one of the characters at the end, and various endings were available depending on what you chose to do when the truth comes out. As it was a limited series, Edge of Extinction was the only Storyscape show to have a complete story that audiences could play through from beginning to end, without a sequel or next season cliffhanger hook. If I'm honest, I was always fine with this. I can't see where else they would have really gone with it. If it had had multiple seasons, it might have become a bit of a drag, like The Walking Dead or something, but I guess we'll never know. While romance is not the focus of the show, nevertheless you do still have two love interests to choose from. Joseph, a geneticist, who starts off in a relationship with a fellow survivor, but after Louis' unfortunate death, which, devastating, by the way, you get your shot at Joe. And Anna, a former Olympian. While she's married to her former coach, it's clear that she likes your character, and you can become involved, encouraging her to leave her husband for you. It's fine, they weren't right for each other anyway. That makes the male to female love interest ratio 1-to-1. For Edge of Extinction. So Edge of Extinction is the last of the books that we, as Storyscape players, got to experience. But there are traces of unreleased Storyscape shows still left behind on the internet, so let's go through them now and try and piece together what we do have. The only unreleased story that we, the public, were ever told anything about, Ageless, was written by former Telltale Games writer Megan Thornton. Intended to be a fresh take on vampire lore, the show was supposed to be about duality, legacy, struggle, and so much more. A mix between gothic, sexy, horror epic meets high-fashion drag theatre, as described by the head writer. As it was unreleased, there are no video archives and very little information about what the plot would have been, but this Tumblr post from Ageless's producer Erin Fusco gives us an idea what the story would have been like. It's been over a year since Fogbank and Storyscape were shut down, and it still pains me to think of how close we were to finishing Ageless. In that story, you could play a non-white, non-binary player character, you could choose your pronouns, the story had romance in it, but it wasn't romance-focused, you could be ace if you wanted, the villain was not conventionally attractive, and you could still choose to romance him. You could choose to be merciful or a blood-crazed murder machine. One of my favourite moments in the show involved a flashback to post-World War II. Since it was a vampire story, there were a lot of flashbacks, and you had the choice to rip the still-beating heart out of a Nazi's chest. The show was created and written by a woman, directed by a gay person of colour, produced by a queer gender-fluid person, me. I've probably said too much and yet would love to say more because I'm so sad none of us will ever get to experience it. Storyscape blog post gives us a look at the three possible appearances for the player character, one masculine, one feminine, and one androgynous, though they all bear similarity, suggesting they are all different versions of the same character, a newly awoken and near-godlike vampire. I suspect that from Erin Fusco's wording that this character would not have been customizable further than choosing their name, pronouns, and one of the three physical appearances, with the character possibly specifically meant to be non-white. There is some artwork in the style guide document that I have also seen on Kate Balfe's Instagram, in which we get a look at the world in which the vampires inhabit, with specific direction about the look of everything. We also get to see some of the vampires' physical characteristics, including a chart that shows various ways a vampire looks depending on how hungry they are, and also presents a state called bloodbent, a state one step up from overfed, which suggests a dangerous, out-of-control state, and a further psychological bloodbent state, known no doubt this one here with the ominous red overtone. I think that seems pretty cool, to be honest, something I've not seen a lot of visually in vampire films. Typically I feel vampire characters always look deathly pale in films and telly, even if they're meant to be well-fed or even overfed, like in this blood-bent state. Our last bit of ageless content is actually the music you've been hearing over this section, as a user under the channel Storyscape Soundtracks uploaded 2 tracks made by Bay Area Sound, who provided all the music for the game, and here for ageless we have a main theme and the other an action theme. And finally, the style guide has a section on one last book that was being worked on but was never at the point where it was even mentioned online in Storyscape socials, and oh, how very exciting for me when I scrolled down the page this far and I saw it. I actually had to get up and pace around for a bit. I told my partner all about it and he sort of nodded pleasantly because this isn't really his interest, but he's supportive. That unreleased show was Sin Eaters, a horror, and as stated in the style guide, a straight-up homage to 90s slasher films. Again, bloody, but they stress blood not meat in the style guide. Written by Tamsyn Muir, author of the very popular Locked Tomb book series, in a Reddit post from August 2020, she says, "I quit teaching last year in order to take on my first games writing job, working for Fogbank Studios, the guys doing the fantastic Storyscape series, but just as I was finishing up on season 1 of my game, we got shut down earlier this year." I personally haven't read any of her work, but it's undoubtedly popular from the way I see Gideon and Harrow fan art on my Tumblr feed 24/7, so I'm sure that Sin Eaters would have been a fantastic experience, and likely would have had great readership from her existing fanbase too. There's little to be gleaned from the style guide about the plot, but a brief introduction to the show says, "It's the summer of 1999, The Matrix is in theatres, Y2K is looming on the horizon, and when the player is called home for a funeral, it seems the past won't stay buried. Their best friend, April, didn't just die, she was murdered, buried in a shallow grave where the player's gang of friends played as kids, with a cryptic accusation stuck in her mouth." This could suggest, at least to me, that there may have been a customizable main character, as there is no name mentioned for the player character. Who's to say? What we can see is the visuals. Seems they definitely wanted to cultivate the look of the early Scream movies, and this page on 1990s fashion don'ts gave me a chuckle, because I would definitely wear most of these things. The Storyscape Reddit page has been extremely valuable to me for finding little nuggets of Storyscape knowledge post-app closure, with a list of author tweets from user Purple Hawk giving us our final clues about 2 more unreleased Storyscape shows. One is a sci-fi rom-com by author Neil Polner, which I personally feel is an extremely underutilized genre, give me more sci-fi rom-coms any day, and 2, something called Phantom of Desire by author Jennifer Hepler, which would have apparently included some really hot ghost sex. I should note that Jennifer Hepler was a former Pixelberry employee herself and had written the Choices book A Courtesan of Rome, which she completed shortly before leaving Pixelberry to work for Storyscape. The Choices wiki states that she returned to Pixelberry for a time after Storyscape closed down, but then moved on to a different studio called Thought Pennies afterwards. No game has surfaced from Thought Pennies so far. The only news I could find on this studio is that they were doing layoffs in 2023, including laying off former Storyscape art director Ken Capelli, so who knows if anything from Thought Pennies will actually surface. So with these last 2 tidbits, that brings us to a total of 9 Storyscape shows that we know anything about, the 5 that were released and playable, 2 that we can see a glimpse of in the style guide, and the briefest ever hint of 2 more via these author tweets. Tragically, because of this whole Disney acquisition, much of what the artist created will never see the light of day due to it not being owned by them anymore, which is crazy. Now, in the ageless section, I mentioned that there were actually some music tracks that we can listen to that were created for ageless, and in fact the channel's Storyscape soundtracks that uploaded them feature several more tracks. These 3 main themes, here titled Main Attraction, Spectre Point, and Tropic Heat. Commenter Hiraya Mayari asks if these were supposed to be books as well, and she got a reply saying, "Yes, we were working on new books when the studio shut," from @ChowB321, who, when I clicked through to his profile, I discovered to be Brian Chow, the game's associate cinematics director. His name is also listed as director on some of the X-Files episodes too, so this seems fairly legit. Now, I don't know where the Storyscape Soundtracks channel got these audio files, as the channel says it was fan-made, Anyway, could these 3 titles be the titles of more unreleased Storyscape shows? Is one of them Neil Polnar's sci-fi rom-com, or are these all other separate shows that were being worked on that again tragically never saw the light of day? So, why did Storyscape fail? In terms of why did it shut down, the short and overly simplified version is that we were a casualty of Disney's buyout of Fox. Fox was trying to make inroads into the games business and had started a number of new video game studios. Disney had different plans, and while some of the other Fox studios found new owners, Fogbank ended up being shuttered. Storyscape had around 3 months of operation after its global release, absolutely nowhere near enough time to establish itself in the midst of this Disney-Fox merger. I genuinely don't think there's anything they could have done. They'd set themselves up well with 2 romantic books because, hey, smut sells, and then the other 3 more adventure, action-type stories full of suspense and intrigue. They were covering all the right bases and all set to cover more with their other titles on the way. Going back through all the bright and hopeful asks and replies on the @PlayStoryscape Tumblr, seeing all the posts about what the team were hoping to do with Storyscape moving forwards, it's hard to look at, to be honest. Since then, the memory of Storyscape seems to have mostly faded to obscurity, though some former Storyscape players do still seem to occasionally post about how much they miss it online. In this one reply from producer Erin Fusco, they do state, "When it comes to Storyscape, my heart will go on, though I know a core part of the old crew is working on something new together. Obviously, I don't want to get anyone's hopes up here, as I expect whatever this something new is won't have anything to do with the existing Storyscape material, released or unreleased, but it's always good to hear that talented people are employed and doing projects and stuff." I'm recording this part a little later as I'm editing. I started working on this video in late 2024, but just towards the end of the year in November, I learned about the unfortunate passing of Erin Fusco, a key staff member on Titanic and Ageless, and someone who was beloved by the fandom as they were someone who seemed really passionate about their job and would reply to messages on Tumblr about Storyscape both before and after the game shut down. Erin was someone I noticed pop up a lot, leaving positive and encouraging messages on people's fan art and fan projects, and I just wanted to highlight her memory. Of course, I didn't know Erin, but I saw her passion and creativity, and she'll obviously be greatly missed. If any of you watching this are able, Erin's family asked that donations be made to Pancreatic Cancer Action Network. That's all. I've included my resources document in the description of the video with links to all the stuff I've used where I found everything, including the Wayback Machine archived pages of the Storyscape blog, as well as Capelli's incredible style guide, and I've listed as many artists and writers as I was able to find in my research there as well. And as for that Choices versus Storyscape love interest male to female ratio comparison from October 2019 to the end of January 2020, Storyscape had 5 shows. The higher ratio of male to female was on 4 of the 5 books, one of which had 2 protagonists with only heterosexual options each. It's a bit more complex. In Choices' first 3 months, Choices had 6 books, so I've also included those male to female love interest ratios. I'm not really sure how conclusive this is overall as a comparison, but there you have it. That's it. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've made it this far, thank you, and you will see me again if there is another one. Goodbye!